Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Moss, and in this video series, I'll be conducting interviews with observability experts at KubeCon 2024. In this video, I'll be interviewing Josh Lee. Be sure to check out some of my other content from KubeCon 2024, including interviews with other observability experts and session summaries from the event. I've linked those videos in the description below, along with some other videos that are related to the topics that we discussed in this interview. And before we dive into the full interview, I want to give you a high-level summary of some of the key insights I gained from it. Josh is a developer advocate at Altinity, and we started the discussion with his journey into observability. He shared an interesting story about how he initially encountered observability challenges as a lead engineer. And one key moment was when his team tried to build their own distributed tracing system from scratch to trace requests through messaging queues. At the time, they weren't aware that distributed tracing was already a solved problem with existing tools available to address those needs. So this was an eye-opening experience for Josh, and it sparked his passion for observability. And here are some of the top trends in observability that Josh highlighted during our interview. First, OpenTelemetry continues to be a major focus in observability, and one interesting development is the adoption of the Open Agent Management Protocol, or OPAMP. He explained that OPAMP is designed to simplify the configuration and management of observability agents and collectors, making it easy for organizations to update configurations and manage deployments of tools like the OpenTelemetry collector. One observability trend that he's very interested in is data sovereignty. Oftentimes, regulatory compliance might require organizations to keep data within a geographic region or retain full control over the data. And besides that, it's also very expensive to store and transfer observability data at scale, and observability tools like OpenTelemetry enable organizations to maintain control over their data. We also talked about the importance of standardization in observability, specifically through OpenTelemetry's semantic conventions, which bring consistency to how data is collected and structured across tools, and making it easier for teams to correlate metrics, logs, and traces. He also highlighted the need to unify observability tooling and addressing tool sprawl within an organization. Many organizations are using 6 or more disparate tools across their stack, creating blind spots and inefficiencies. OpenTelemetry's vendor-neutral and interoperable approach offers a solution. It allows teams to standardize their data collection while integrating multiple tools. Now let's dive into some of the challenges organizations face with observability. One of the biggest challenges he highlighted was simply a lack of awareness. Even at some of the largest organizations, teams often rely on minimal observability setups like manually retrieving logs when issues arise. Another challenge is the lack of clear best practices or standard starting points for teams who are new to observability. And he suggested that as the industry matures, more established paths will emerge to guide practitioners. There's also a perception that observability is complex and expensive, even when the benefits outweigh the costs. And he explained that this often deters teams, especially since observability is not a top priority when engineers already have so much else on their plates. So what is his advice for teams who are starting out with observability? Number one is start small and build incrementally, and focus on the practical use and adoption of observability. It's not about collecting all of the data or deploying every observability feature. It's about ensuring that the tools and processes you put in place are actually being used and delivering value to your team. And here are some other observability insights from our interview. I asked him about the vendor-neutral approach in OpenTelemetry, and he brought up a great point that the vendor neutrality of OpenTelemetry is not so much about being able to switch vendors on the fly. It's more so about making observability tooling interoperable. And that flexibility ensures that organizations can unify their tools over time without massive disruptions. He had presented at the conference about auto-instrumentation, so I definitely had to ask him more about that. He emphasized that there's a lot of value in auto-instrumentation because it reduces the cognitive load on developers. With auto-instrumentation, you can collect observability data without requiring teams to modify their code manually. And this can be really valuable in organizations where some teams may not prioritize observability because you still get visibility across the board without having to rely on developer buy-in. Now that you've seen the highlights, let's dive into the full interview where we explore these topics in depth and hear his unique insights on observability. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to KubeCon 2024. I'm here with...
I'm Josh Lee.
Thank you, Josh, for joining me today and agreeing to interview. Would you mind starting off just introducing yourself and your role and what you work on?
Sure, absolutely. So I am a developer advocate at Altinity, and we are a small company that does hosting and expert services for ClickHouse. And if you haven't heard of ClickHouse, it is a massively scalable analytics database that is very commonly used in observability tooling.
Very cool. Awesome. Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in observability?
So I came to observability through my role at IBM and Stan. I was a developer advocate and a product manager there for about 2.5 years. Before that, I was working, often as a lead engineer on teams and just struggling with doing observability wrong, right? And all of the things that you can, all of the pain that you can feel in that situation. I like to tell a story of I invented distributed tracing on my own on one team because we didn't know that someone else had already done it, and it was a solved problem that we could just do. So we're like, yeah, we need to trace these requests through our messaging queues. Let's figure out a way to do that. And so then discovering that there's this whole universe of tooling to do these things and make it easier was really amazing. And ever since then, I've just been in love with helping other people learn that.
That's awesome. Awesome. Thanks for your answer. I'm pivoting towards more the conference.
Yeah.
Are there any specific presentations and projects that you've seen here that you think have the potential to drive interesting changes in the industry?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'll be honest, I haven't seen too many of the presentations because it's just, I like to catch them later. I'm not one of the go to all the presentations type of people. I'm more of a hallway track type of person. But that being said, I really enjoyed the panel at Observability Day on Monday. It involved several people, including VJ Samuel and Hazel Weekly, and there were a few other folks whose names escape me at the moment. But I was just furiously writing down notes from that session in terms of practical observability at scale, and from people who have actually been doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I attended that panel session. It was really, really valuable information that they provided, talking about how they've implemented observability, end-to-end observability in eBay, for instance.
Yeah.
I thought it was just really valuable to hear, their experience.
Yeah.
Are there any trends? I mean, OpenTelemetry has been, of course, a big trend.
Yes.
But are there any trends or specific topics at KubeCon that have really caught your attention?
So one thing that I was a little bit surprised to see so much around is within OpenTelemetry is OpAmp. So I actually ran into a couple of vendors, and I wish I could remember their names, but I can't, that were building tools around OpAmp. And then I also talked to a few observability vendors like Signos, who are just already building OpAmp into their tool so that their customers can use it to not have to deal with the complexity of configuring an OTel collector or managing a fleet of OTel collectors.
And for someone who's brand new, and this includes me,
yeah.
Could you kind of define OpAmp and what it does?
Absolutely. So I reserve the right to be wrong, but I believe it stands for Open Agent Management Protocol. And the idea is that it's a standard specifying an API for updating the configuration and managing the deployments of collectors and observability agents. So it's not unique to the OpenTelemetry collector. A vendor agent could also implement OpAmp, and then an OpAmp control plane tool could manage both the vendor agents and the open source OpenTelemetry collectors.
That's really interesting. Is that something that there's currently a solution for? Are companies doing OpAmp, but it's proprietary right now?
Yeah, I think that would be the case, is that if there's any kind of, this relates to an idea that I have been calling full circle observability, right? This idea that from the lessons that we get from our analysis tools, we want to be amending how we're collecting the data in the first place so that we're not collecting too much data, or so that we do have the right data that we might have been missing from a certain investigation. So I think this is a really interesting idea. I haven't actually seen that many implementations of it, proprietary or otherwise. So that's why OpAmp is so exciting to me.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you. Moving more towards general observability trends, what are the most exciting trends right now in observability that you see?
So something that's, I don't know that it's the most exciting to everyone, but the most exciting to me is just the idea of data sovereignty. And the idea that you could have an observability tool that works on data that you own in your own cloud account or in your own on-premise data center using open standards like Parquet.
Gotcha. Very cool. Yeah, I haven't worked very much in that sense, like with data sovereignty, but can you kind of go in a little bit more detail about like what does data sovereignty mean?
So it's really just owning your own data, and there can be a couple of reasons why a company might want to own their own data. The most important one that comes up would be for regulatory reasons, right? If there's some kind of regulation that says you can't ship your data across a border or even outside of your organization, you have to own all your data, you have no choice. And so you're forced into a tool that allows you to own the data. That may or may not be in an open format right now, based on current tooling. But another reason that I think it's interesting, even to companies that aren't subject to regulatory pressure, is just because of the cost of observability data at scale. It's extremely expensive to move and to store. And so if you can avoid moving it and control how it's stored, you have much better management of those costs.
Definitely, absolutely. I guess there's also an aspect of privacy as well, right? And with AI everywhere,
yes.
I think a lot of companies are definitely trying to protect their data while still maintaining like the benefit of adding AI into whatever their product or service is.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point as well. The companies would rather use the data to train their own models, if any, rather than train a vendor's model.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on to observability implementation and specifically challenges. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've encountered when implementing observability in a complex environment?
It doesn't even need to be a complex environment. I think one of the bigger challenges is just lack of understanding and lack of a clear golden path. Right? OpenTelemetry is an awesome project. I love all of the various pieces of it, like we've just been talking about OpAmp. But for someone who's new to the project and just getting started, I don't even know what to tell them, right? I have to have a 30-minute conversation with them to figure out where to tell them to start, because there's so many possibilities. I don't know that there's a solution to that. Maybe it just comes from maturity in the industry and all of us kind of establishing a smaller subset of golden paths so that we can then steer people towards one of those.
Interesting. Do you think it's like that's just a result of maybe observability being kind of nascent and like still in early stages, like that there's not really good best practices formed around observability yet? Or
absolutely, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So you and I are both in the observability bubble, right? We work with observability companies. We talk to people doing observability all the time. But I also talk to people who are outside of the observability bubble. And it's a little bit terrifying sometimes what I hear for me, but for them it's just normal. That what most people are doing when it comes to observability is they have a little bit of Prometheus for their infrastructure, and then if something goes wrong, it's kubectl get logs. And like I'm talking like Fortune 10 companies are doing it this way. Yeah. And yeah, that's where the industry's actually at.
Gotcha. So there's a big lack of awareness right now.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And when implementing observability, have you encountered like resistance in an organization to observability? Like, okay, they're aware of it, but they don't want to adopt it, that maybe the cost or something like that?
I think cost is a big one. I think it's perceived as expensive even when it's not necessarily, or even when the cost could certainly be outweighed by the benefits. But it's perceived as complicated, it's perceived as expensive, and it's really not front of mind for most engineers and SREs, right? They have a million other things that their product managers and their engineering managers want them to do, right? They have compliance departments that are after them to do, code coverage things. And so they know that they need observability, but it's aspirational.
Yeah, gotcha. And advice for practitioners. What advice would you give to teams of practitioners who are just starting out on their observability journey?
So especially if you're here at KubeCon and like taking in all of the exciting technologies, my advice would be don't get ahead of yourself. Start with what you have, right? Like I'm saying it's bad to just use Prometheus and kubectl, but if that's your starting point, then like don't just say, okay, we're gonna go all in and do all of the things. Add one thing at a time and make sure that it's working for you before you add the next thing.
Yeah, I feel like you could definitely like just implement everything and then people aren't using it, right?
Right.
Like it just sits there, and and you're paying for
Yeah.
whatever like data you're collecting and stuff like that, whether it's wherever it's being stored.
We've got petabytes of logs that no one ever looks at.
Cool. And for people who think they have, they've got it all figured out with observability, do you have anything to say to them?
I think the most exciting thing for them is just the possibility of unifying the tools, right? I think it was in the Grafana State of Observability report that most organizations are using at least 6 observability tools across their organization.
Wow.
So I think even the folks who think that they have it figured out because they're using 6 awesome tools, that's a little bit insane. We can still simplify this. We can still do better.
Yeah, definitely. And unifying the observability experience, sometimes those tools are not connected.
Yeah.
And there are certain platforms that do provide a unified experience that you can get a lot of benefit from. Any lessons learned, mistakes that you've made while implementing observability?
Sure. So now I'm at a database company, but my background was in application development and distributed tracing. So I tried to implement distributed tracing for our database platform, and it turns out that's not that useful.
Nice. Very cool. You had a really excellent talk on auto instrumentation, right?
Thank you.
And I wanted, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of giving kind of an overview of auto instrumentation and maybe some of the highlights that from the talk that you had.
Sure. I'll try and do a 2-minute version.
Yeah.
So there's auto instrumentation. A big part of the talk is really just disambiguating what auto instrumentation is, because to some people it just means library instrumentation, right? It means I include a dependency and then I don't have to go manually add spans to all of my request handlers. And that's great, but in my talk I define that as library instrumentation, which is sort of the starting point, and then you have these other mechanisms, and those mechanisms vary depending on which programming language we're talking about, for injecting those libraries along with the OpenTelemetry SDKs into your program without ever modifying the code or explicitly adding a dependency in your package manager.
Yeah, and I mean, that was in the eBay talk, for instance, or the panel talk. I remember the eBay engineers saying a focus on reducing the cognitive load for developers, right?
Yeah.
And if you're trying to implement observability in your organization, and you're like, by the way, you have to modify your code, and so definitely I can see where auto instrumentation can be a really big benefit when you're trying to sell observability in maybe your organization.
Absolutely. I think especially teams that are trying to standardize observability across their organization, you're going to meet teams who are all in on that and want to work with you, and they want to own their code, and they want to own their code in production, and they want to instrument it, and they want to know exactly what all of the metrics mean, and they want good structured logs. And then you're going to have teams, probably at the same organization, who don't even want to touch it until their manager tells them that they have to. And auto instrumentation as a standard practice across the organization means that even when you have those uncooperative teams, you're going to get some visibility to what they're doing. They're not going to break your traces for your entire organization. And then for the cooperative teams, the OTel SDK is right there, and they can start layering additional information on top of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So moving on to OpenTelemetry, specifically OpenTelemetry's vendor agnostic approach.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes. So people say vendor neutral next to the words OpenTelemetry so often. And it is true, it's great. Yes, OpenTelemetry is vendor neutral, and that is beautiful. Coming from working at an observability vendor, a lot of my colleagues thought that vendor neutrality meant that we were going to lose all of our customers overnight because they would just be able to switch vendors like that, and they wouldn't feel any pain from doing that, which is absolutely insane. To me, that is not at all what vendor neutrality means. It doesn't mean that you can switch vendors. To me, it means that you can take that point that we were talking about from the Grafana report, where 6 people are using 6 different tools, and you can iteratively work on improving that without having to burn anything down.
Yeah.
So I say vendor neutrality means things that are always interoperable. And that's especially valuable in the situation where you have an organization acquiring another organization. They might be using different vendors for their observability. But at least now, the blast radius of that migration is not going to impact what's actually in the code, what's in the deployed binaries.
Gotcha. So it can definitely mitigate in situations like that, but it's not hey, we're losing, like you said, losing a lot of customers.
Yeah, definitely not.
Very awesome.
Because people make themselves at home in their observability tools, as they should.
Of course, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you want to set it and not forget it, but in a way.
You want to make it yours.
You want to focus on feature work, and there's a lot of other stuff to do as well. Right?
Yeah.
And what's the primary value of introducing OpenTelemetry into an organization?
To me, I would say it's limiting the blast radius of migrations, whatever the cause of that migration is. If it's a change in a vendor's pricing model, if it's a vendor going out of business or being acquired, it's your company going out of business or being acquired, right? So there are lots of different business events that can cause you to have to use new tools. And I think that isolating the blast radius is one of the biggest values of OpenTelemetry. But another huge value is just the standardization, right? That we have the semantic conventions, and this now means that it doesn't matter what signal I'm looking at, it doesn't matter what tool someone is using, I'm going to have consistency in the metadata, and that is the most important thing for correlating across the silos, which is something we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's standardization, and when I was looking at some of the OTel project updates, the semantic conventions that I was seeing that were coming up, like CI/CD, I was like, this is great to have the addition of these other conventions being added. It's really exciting.
And I actually missed this point while we were talking about vendor neutrality, but I think it's really important. An important benefit of the vendor neutrality of OpenTelemetry is it shifts who's doing the instrumentation. So it used to be the observability vendors doing the instrumentation for everything. But now the tool and infrastructure providers are the ones doing the instrumentation for their own tools and for their own clouds and solutions, right? AWS is instrumenting AWS. Microsoft is instrumenting Azure solutions. And they're honestly in the best position to do that, much more so than a host of observability companies all trying to follow what they're doing and keep up with it, right? It's just a much better model.
Totally agree. Thanks a lot. And I have one final question for you. This is about use cases. Do you have any unique or surprising observability use cases that you've encountered?
Yeah, so this is my favorite one, and I hope it'll be obviated soon by profiling. But I heard of a company where they basically had instrumented their platform down to the function level, but then had a flag so that they could turn that on or off as needed for specific requests. So they basically built themselves profiling through distributed tracing, which is a huge abuse of distributed tracing tools and why we need profiling as a signal, but it's also really cool.
That's pretty awesome. It reminds me of some of the memes where you see how developers think that users are going to use it and then how users actually use it. So that's pretty cool. Josh, thank you so much for taking time to interview with me. It was really great. I hope that you have a great rest of the sessions here at KubeCon. And thank you everybody for watching this interview, and enjoy watching the rest of the sessions at KubeCon. Thank you.
Thanks, Moss. It was my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, we'd love to hear your feedback. Be sure to check out some of my other content from KubeCon 2024, including interviews with other observability experts and session summaries from the event. I've linked those videos in the description below, along with some other videos that are related to the topics that we discussed in this interview. Thanks for watching.